The knock came just after sunset. I wasn't expecting anyone. Not on a Tuesday. Not with the wind pushing against the windows like that. I wasn't sure what I'd been expecting, but it wasn't them. When I opened the door, I saw him standing there. Flo. Taller than I remembered. His face had that sharp look in his eyes, like he was already irritated, like whatever was going on in his world had me written all over it. And behind him was Rachel, arms crossed, gripping a small suitcase in one hand and a yoga mat in the other. "Hey, we're crashing here for a bit," Flo said, brushing past me without waiting for a response. Rachel followed, her perfume almost shouting as it trailed behind her. I stepped back, still holding the dish towel I'd been using. Neither of them said hello. Neither of them needed to. Flo dropped his duffel bag by the coat rack, but didn't bother to hang it up. His boots, muddy, worn, sat right on my coffee table as if they were a permanent fixture. Rachel opened the fridge with a loud sigh. "Do you not have almond milk?" she muttered, her voice clipped. I didn't answer. I didn't have almond milk. And I sure as hell didn't remember inviting them. Flo flopped down onto the recliner, completely at ease. "We're only here until we get some stuff figured out. Shouldn't be long," he added, eyes glued to his phone. No explanation, no apology. Just a cold declaration of what was. Rachel was already upstairs, and I heard the bathroom door click shut a second later. I stood there for a long moment, the dish towel still in my hand. The tension in the air felt almost suffocating. We didn't speak much that night. Rachel ordered delivery, but didn't ask if I wanted any. Flo scrolled through his phone, checked the TV, fiddled with the thermostat. I made myself some tea and stayed quiet. Just before bed, as I was rinsing my cup, Flo's voice cut through the stillness of the house. "Breakfast at 7 for me and Rachel. Old lady, make it how she likes it," he called from the hallway before the door slammed shut behind him. I dried my cup slowly, then went to my room. I pulled out the little clock from my drawer and set the alarm for 6. Not for cooking, but for something else. Something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but something I knew was coming. The next morning, when I came out of my bedroom, the hallway was already full of boxes, stacked, labeled with Rachel's handwriting, linens, books, kitchen glass. Not suitcases. Boxes. I stood frozen for a moment, my breath catching. I didn't know what was going on, but I could feel the room shifting, like everything was about to fall into place, but in a way I didn't understand yet. Flo was in the garage, dragging one of my storage bins outside. Rachel was standing in the living room, arms folded, her eyes scanning the walls as if she were already planning a remodel. "This place has great bones," she said, more to herself than to me, but the judgment was there. "But the wall colors are outdated. We'll brighten it up. Maybe something cooler. More modern." She didn't ask for my opinion. Didn't even care. She just kept walking, her hand trailing along the hallway molding, and I watched her. She paused in front of the bookshelf, the one my husband had built all those years ago when we first moved in. Rachel tilted her head and tapped the side of it. "This will have to go," she said. "Takes up too much space. We'll put a flat screen here. Mount it clean." I stood there, staring at the bookshelf, her hand still resting on the wood. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know if I could. A few minutes later, Flo came back inside, wiping sweat from his forehead. He flopped down onto the couch like he was right at home. "Just until after the refinance goes through," he said casually, like I'd been a part of this conversation. "Shouldn't be more than a few weeks." "Refinance." He waved his hand as if it were nothing. "Yeah, some paperwork stuff. Rachel's handling most of it." He turned the TV on again, like it was nothing. I stood in the kitchen, the smell of my tea filling the silence, the weight of the moment pressing in on me. I opened the drawer under the microwave, pushed past the rubber bands and old recipe cards, and there it was, the small gray recorder tucked under the dish towels. I could feel my heartbeat speed up as I grabbed it. The red light blinked steadily, the battery full. They were settling in, making themselves comfortable, like the house was already theirs. But what they didn't know was that I'd already been one step ahead of them. I already knew where the deed was kept. And I had no intention of letting go. You can already feel it, right? The house, the tension, the walls closing in. But here's the thing. Not everything is what it seems. Stay with me, there's more. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. That evening, after Flo and Rachel had gone out, I let the silence fill the house. I didn't know what they were doing, but I didn't care. It didn't matter. I had to take a moment to think, to gather myself before I made the next move. The front door clicked shut, and I waited for another couple of minutes, just in case. When I was sure they were gone, I headed to the study. The recorder was exactly where I'd left it. I took it out of the drawer, the cold plastic feeling heavy in my hands, and closed the door behind me. I pressed play. The first thing I heard was the sound of shuffling footsteps, and then Rachel's voice, sharp, clipped. You need to keep her busy. I can't file anything if she's hovering around. Flo's voice followed, low, almost mocking. She won't notice. I'll get her to sign the loan addendum while she's distracted. She always used to just trust me. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, the words wrapping around me like a vice. Rachel's voice returned, quieter now, but no less dangerous. Once she signs, we flip it. Sell it before she even knows what she gave up. We don't even have to tell her we're moving. I froze. My hands, steady a second ago, were shaking now. I rewound the recording, played it again. And then again. She won't notice. She's too slow to notice. I sat there for a long moment, the weight of their words settling in, curling around my chest. This wasn't a visit. This wasn't just about helping out. This was a plan. A calculated move to take everything from me while I wasn't looking. I looked over at the bookshelf. The same bookshelf my husband had built with his hands. The same bookshelf I'd spent countless hours filling with memories, with stories, with parts of our lives. I knew what I had to do next. I stood up, moved to the bookshelf, and shifted the ladder slightly. The dusty row of old grammar books, the ones no one had touched in years, were in my way. I pushed them aside and revealed the small safe hidden behind them. I hadn't opened it in years, but the combination came easily, like muscle memory. I twisted the dial, and the safe clicked open. Inside, I found the deed to the house, a copy of the will, and notarized documents, sealed in plastic. My name. My husband's signature from 25 years ago. The lawyer's stamp. Everything in place, untouched, just the way it had always been. I checked it once, twice, not out of panic, but for clarity. I needed to be sure. I relocked the safe and slid the books back into place, adjusted one of them that had tilted slightly forward. Then, I went to the kitchen and boiled water for tea. They thought they were clever. They thought they had me figured out. But what they didn't realize was that I hadn't given them anything yet. Not the deed, not the house, and certainly not my life. Are you starting to see the pieces fall into place? The recorder, the deed, the lies they've been feeding me. This isn't just about a house anymore. This is about power. Who has it, who's been controlling it, and who's going to take it back? Stick with me. There's more to this story than anyone expected. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, the way you do when your mind has already decided that sleep is finished. The gray light of dawn crept through the window, casting everything in a soft, muted glow. The house felt quieter than usual, like even the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something. I moved through the kitchen slowly, not hesitating, but with purpose. I took out the envelopes I'd prepared the night before, laid them on the counter like a careful arrangement of chess pieces. No food. No breakfast. Just an empty kitchen, 3 envelopes, and a truth that had been too long in the making. I placed them side by side, one with Flo's name, one with Rachel's, and one labeled in bold, black letters, attorney. Just in case. The house above me stirred. The sound of doors opening, footsteps on the stairs. I could hear Flo's groggy voice, muffled through the walls, followed by Rachel's sharp, impatient tone. The house was still, but it was charged with the kind of tension you feel before a storm. The coffee maker dripped steadily as I waited. I didn't want to rush this moment. When they finally came downstairs, they didn't greet me. No good morning. No acknowledgement. Just Flo, sitting at the table with a stretch, like he was preparing to settle in for a meal he hadn't earned. Rachel followed, her presence like an unwelcome breeze. "Is breakfast ready?" she asked, yawning dramatically as if the entire house were conspiring against her. I didn't answer. I just carried the coffee pot over to the table and poured a cup for each of them. Then, slowly, I slid the envelopes toward them. "Before breakfast," I said, my voice calm but unyielding, "read these." Neither of them moved at first. The envelopes sat there like ticking time bombs. They stared at them, unmoving, as if I'd asked them to open a trap instead of a piece of paper. "What's this supposed to be?" Flo asked, his voice low but already rising in frustration. I didn't answer. I simply sat down, folding my hands around my own mug, the steam rising between us like the space that had grown so thick over the years. The silence hung in the room, heavy and undeniable. Not angry, but a silence that felt final. Rachel was the first to touch her envelope, her fingers hesitant, almost as if she were afraid of what might be inside. I watched her as the seconds dragged on. Finally, Flo reached for his envelope. He tore it open like it was an insult to be sitting there. Papers spilled out, fluttering softly, hitting the table with a finality that seemed to echo in the stillness of the room. His eyes scanned the first few lines, and I could see the way his expression shifted from annoyance to confusion, then disbelief. "What is this?" he muttered, his voice cracking with frustration. Rachel didn't answer at first. She was still staring at the contents of her envelope, her face slowly losing color as she flipped through the notarized documents. The official seal. The signatures. The lawyer's stamp. "Wait," Rachel whispered, as though a piece of the puzzle she'd been building was falling apart before her eyes. "These are official?" I nodded. "The deed to the house. In my name. Fully paid off 10 years ago. No updates, no changes. I never signed anything new." Flo scoffed. "So we're just helping you update things," he said, like it was a joke. But it wasn't funny. Not anymore. I didn't let the emotion rise in my chest. I remained calm, steady. "There's no update. I never signed anything new. The power of attorney hasn't changed. And last night, I replayed your conversation. So no, I don't need your help." The color drained from Rachel's face as the weight of the words hit her. She opened her envelope slowly, almost methodically. Her fingers trembled slightly as she looked over the papers. Her eyes darted back and forth, reading the familiar names, the signatures, the stamps. "Last fall," I continued, "after your little surprise visit, I made sure everything was squared away." Flo's jaw tightened. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively. "So what? You're just going to act like we're the enemy now?" I didn't need to respond. I didn't have to. In that moment, it was clear who the real enemy was. And it wasn't me. Rachel stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly across the floor, and left the room without a word. I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. Flo stayed behind for a moment, staring at the table, his gaze dark and confused. I finished my coffee in silence, then stood to clear the mugs, washing them slowly under the cool water. There was nothing more to say. The truth had been laid bare. And they weren't hungry for it anymore. The quiet after the storm. The power shifts, and the consequences of the truth start to settle in. But the real battle is just beginning, and I'm not done yet. Stay with me. You're going to want to see what happens next. The day passed slowly, each moment stretching out longer than the last. When they finally left, the house felt like it had taken a deep breath. Kendra, no, Rachel, had said something about needing oat milk, about throwing pillows. Flo had followed her, hands deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched as if the world had just become too heavy for him. I walked down the block, past the same lilacs I had planted 20 years ago, back when this house was new to us. I didn't rush. The air was crisp, the kind that felt like a promise. And as I made my way to Ramona's house, I found myself letting go of the weight that had been bearing down on me. She was already out front, trimming the hedge, the scent of fresh-cut branches hanging in the air. "Morning," she said, wiping her gloves on her jeans. "You don't usually drop by on a weekday." I nodded. "Can I ask you something? Legal." Ramona didn't blink. "Inside. Tea or coffee?" "Neither," I replied, my voice low. "Just time." Her kitchen smelled like lemon balm and honey, the scent wrapping itself around me, reminding me of the old days. She sat across from me, waiting patiently, as though she could sense the weight in my words. I didn't drag it out. I couldn't. How fast could a protective order be filed? I asked. Ramona didn't hesitate. She met my gaze with that quiet strength of hers, like she had all the answers in the world but was waiting for me to ask the right question. "From you to them?" I nodded. "Yes." She didn't ask why. She just stood up, walked into the hallway, and picked up the landline. There was no speakerphone. No show. Just the simple act of making a call. I didn't need to hear the words. I didn't ask who she called. But when she returned, she said, "It's ready if you want it." I looked at her, my chest tight. "Not yet. But thank you." Ramona didn't ask anything further. We didn't talk much after that. I walked home slowly, my mind racing with everything that had happened. Everything that was coming. Back inside, the house was just as I left it, but something was different. The shoes in the hallway, the jacket thrown over the stair rail, the crumbs left on the counter by Rachel. No, by Kendra. It was all still there, a reminder of their presence, of the time they thought they had here. Just after 8 that evening, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Flo. "You didn't have to make this ugly," it read. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I stared at the message, letting the weight of his words settle in. And then I opened the hall closet and pulled out 2 empty boxes. One was labeled bathroom, theirs. EW. The other was labeled bedroom, theirs. I began packing the easy things first. His cologne. Her protein bars. The candle she'd lit in my guest room without asking. It wasn't about anger. Not anymore. It was about clarity. They were already trying to take everything from me, piece by piece, but they didn't know how much I had already taken back. The house wasn't just a house anymore. It was mine, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. When I finished packing the last box just after sunrise, everything fit more neatly than I expected. The house was helping me let them go, piece by piece. It felt like an exhale, as if the house itself was shedding the weight of their presence. I stacked the boxes on the porch next to their luggage. There was nothing damaged, nothing discarded. Just returned. The coffee was still warm when I heard the engine in the driveway. The car doors slammed. I didn't move. I stayed behind the screen door, watching. Flo saw the boxes first. He stopped, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, his voice rising as he stepped forward. "You packed our stuff? You put it outside?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The truth was already there, laid bare. He stepped onto the porch, hands out like I was supposed to hear him. "You'd throw your own son out?" His voice cracked, but it wasn't out of sorrow. It was out of anger, of frustration, frustration that I had stopped playing along. I met his eyes through the mesh of the screen door. "I'm not throwing you out, Flo," I said, my voice calm, my hands steady. "I'm letting you walk out." Rachel didn't say anything. She just looked at the boxes, then at me. Her face wasn't angry. There was no fake sweetness, no thin veneer of politeness. Just the flat stare of someone who finally realized the show was over, and the crowd had stopped clapping. She pulled the keys from her pocket and started walking back to the car, no hesitation in her step. Flo turned to her, disbelief in his eyes. "You're not going to say anything?" She didn't look back. Flo stood there for a moment longer, frozen, before grabbing the last box. He stomped down the steps, muttering under his breath, "You'll regret this." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He tossed the box into the trunk and slammed the car door harder than he needed to, the sound echoing down the street. The car pulled away before he even closed the door fully. I stood there, watching the dust settle, the tires fading down the road. The porch was empty. The house felt, not bigger, but right-sized again. The space I had made for myself was finally real. I turned the doorknob and stepped inside. I didn't lock the door behind me, but I didn't leave it open either. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time before stepping inside. It looked cleaner than before, but not in the way I liked. It wasn't the kind of neatness that felt like home. It was the sterile kind, the kind that comes when someone else decides what belongs and what doesn't. The pantry door hung open, half the shelves bare. Jars I had filled with summer tomatoes, green beans, pears in cinnamon and vinegar, gone. She hadn't asked. She never did. Just tossed them all out. I imagined the way Rachel must have wrinkled her nose when she saw anything without a barcode. I reached under the sink and pulled out the plastic bin I kept for storage. The jars I hadn't rotated yet. My husband's handwriting still curled across the masking tape labels. Chili 2022, pickles, spicy peach butter's favorite. I held one up to the light, turning it slowly. The seal was still tight. I set it gently back on the shelf, one by one, placing them where they belonged. Not just the food, but the care, the hours, the hands that made it. I found the old kettle behind the blender, shoved to the back of the cabinet, and rinsed it out. The flame crackled on the stove, blue and calm, and I opened a fresh tin of tea, the kind I saved for slow mornings. The warmth spread through the kitchen. The quiet stayed with me, not empty, not oppressive, but earned. I poured the tea into my favorite mug, the one with the faded paint, the one I'd used before Flo could even walk. I didn't need anyone to hand me back the story they thought they could steal. I already had it. And I wasn't going to let go. The truth is, once you take back what's yours, once you stand your ground, there's nothing left to fear. But even now, I know the hardest part is yet to come. Stick around. The journey is far from over. And I promise, you won't want to miss the end. The house felt like it had been holding its breath for days, but as the days passed, the silence grew more familiar. It wasn't the kind of emptiness that screamed for attention, but the kind of quiet that settles in when something's been broken, then mended, still a little cracked, but stronger in the right places. I'd filled the spaces again with my own rhythm, my own time, and the house was finally beginning to feel like mine again. Not just the walls, but everything inside. There was a moment, late one evening, when I stood at the window, watching the shadows stretch long across the yard. The breeze had shifted, the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's garden mixing with the cool air that always arrived just before dark. I stood there, waiting for the world to turn again, for the weight to settle, for something to change. The phone buzzed on the counter, its screen lighting up with another message from Flo. "You can't do this. It's just a house." I almost laughed. Almost. It wasn't just a house. Not anymore. It was everything. It was my everything. And I knew that better than anyone else. I set the phone down without responding. There was no need. There was nothing left to explain. The next day, I found myself in the backyard, gathering the last of the fallen leaves, the ones that had lingered longer than they should have, the ones that felt like they belonged to someone else's memory. But I let them go, too. I picked them up, one by one, and tossed them into the compost bin. Let them break down into something else. Something new. That afternoon, as I made my way back inside, I saw a familiar figure at the front door. Ramona. She was standing there, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, her expression soft but knowing. "Hey," I greeted her. I didn't need to ask what brought her here. She always knew. "Hey yourself," she said, giving me that look. The one that said everything. The one that said she knew I'd been through something, but I'd made it through. She wasn't here for pity or sympathy. She was here for clarity. "I heard you were packing up," she said, stepping inside, her boots scraping softly against the floor. "I did," I replied, still standing in the doorway, looking past her at the world outside. "I packed it all up. Gave it back. The things that never belonged to me in the first place." She nodded, taking in the quiet of the house. "You ready to let go?" I hesitated, my fingers tracing the doorframe behind me. "I already did," I said softly. "A long time ago." Ramona let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Good. Because you don't get to reclaim something if you're still holding on to what you're supposed to be letting go of." I closed the door behind her, the click of the lock finally feeling like it had purpose. The house wasn't just locked in anymore. Neither was I. We were moving forward. We spent the afternoon together in the kitchen, a kettle of tea between us, and for once, the conversations didn't feel forced. There was no need for explanation, no need to rush through the small talk. We just sat there, quietly, like the world had slowed down for us. That evening, just after sunset, I took out the small, crumpled map I hadn't looked at in years. The one I'd kept folded up in my drawer. It was old, yellowing at the edges, the places we'd circled, the Oregon coast, Taos, small towns in Maine. Places we had talked about visiting but never did. I spread it out on the kitchen table, smoothing out the creases with my palm. The world beyond these walls felt bigger somehow. More possible. I picked up the phone, dialing the number I'd written down years ago, the one I hadn't dared call, not until now. When the line clicked, I heard Ramona's voice on the other end, still light, still full of that quiet joy. "Do you think we're too old to travel?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She paused, just long enough to make me think she was considering it. Then she answered, her voice warm, full of life. "Delma, if you wait too long, you'll be packing for heaven instead." We both laughed, the sound light and freeing, as if we were finally shedding the weight of a lifetime of waiting. After we hung up, I refilled the kettle, letting it warm up again. This time, I chose the fancier tea, the one I'd been saving for a special occasion. I didn't know why I'd been saving it. Maybe I thought I'd never get around to using it. But today it felt right. The steam curled up from the cup, wrapping around me like a comforting hug. I took a sip, letting the warmth fill me from the inside out. The house was quiet now, not empty, but full of possibilities. I didn't need a suitcase to begin something new. I didn't need anyone to hand me back the life they thought they could take. The house was mine again, not because I had kicked them out, but because I had let go of everything that wasn't mine in the first place. The house was more than walls. It was my story, and I was finally ready to keep writing it. You've been with me through all of this, through the silence, the tension, and the truth. But this isn't the end. It's just a new beginning. If you've been standing your ground and reclaiming your life too, share your story with me. You're not alone in this. Tell me in the comments. And if you're ready for more stories about strength, resilience, and taking back what's yours, hit subscribe. The journey's just getting started.